Hello and welcome to another pcalc stream. Uh, these ones I did some stuff off stream a couple weeks ago, so I'll go over that quick. This commit here, I got rid of a unneeded semicolon in a macro there, and then I also started adding some just kind of syntactic sugar to the code. So instead of saying i32 size of, I made a macro that's just size underscore of, which does the same thing. Instead of static for, local static variables, I renamed that to persistent. I also made a global thing so that I can search for globals, and that just doesn't do anything. I made a couple wrappers for for loops. I made one that's a for range and one that's a for each. So for range takes the name of the variable, the index to start at, and what you're looping to. And then for each is the same thing, except it doesn't have a starting index. It just starts at 0, right? Just some simple syntactic sugar to make things a little bit cleaner. Let's see if there's anything else interesting in here. Here you can see the for each. Yeah, in the XUB backend, I cleaned up some of the stuff. Just kind of doing the same changes as well as updating the comments to be a little bit more searchable. Yeah, and so I refactored some stuff. I got these things: null, false, true, int max, va arg, va end, va start, bool, i8, i16, i32, i64, u8, u16, u32, u64, size t, and va list. I removed those definitions from the Linux 8664 backend file. And I created 2 new files for data models. And so I have a data model that just relies on libc to handle the data model for you. So it's just like a wrapper for a wrapper. So, I just include the relevant files like limits to get int max, stdarg to get the va arg stuff, stdbool to get bool and true and false, stddef to get size t and null, stdint to get the standard, fixed width integer types, and then I just type def those to the type names I'm using, right? And then model LP64, which is, longs and pointers being 64 bits, which is the data model for Linux on a 64-bit, Linux platform. I just define all the stuff that was originally in the Linux x86-64 backend, right? And the reason I split those out is to make it a little bit nicer. Before, I had to do these type defs for the C backend. I needed to do this stuff in the Unity build file, so I wanted to split that out. And then this is where I define those syntactic sugar things. It's just some macros in a sugar.c file, right? And so you can see those are all very basic stuff. And yeah, I updated the Unity build accordingly, and that's all there was to that commit. And then there's one other commit. Yes, I added maybe inline to the sugar as well. So this allows some stuff that really ought to be inlined to be inlined. And I also made my types for padding more consistent. So now for every time I have some padding, I name the variables by a consistent scheme, and I always use I8 and then having to be an array of I8 for padding. That's how I do all the padding now, just to make it more consistent, because before I was kind of doing, you know, anything and everything to pad, and it was you know, some of the variables had different names. Sometimes I'd use arrays, sometimes I'd use, you know, just variables of relevant types. Why does this say loading? Okay, I split attribute noReturn onto its own line, and here you can see an example of that. Instead of U16 as 3, I call this pad 0, and it's I8 and 6. And then, so when you have multiple paddings, I start at pad 0, and then the next one is pad 1, and so on and so forth, right? So it's just a consistent naming scheme and a, you know, a consistent way to write an arbitrary amount of padding. So all of the padding looks the same. Just makes the code a little bit more readable. And then for this initializer, I got rid of setting the padding because that doesn't really need to be done. Because we don't care what the value of the padding is anyway. And like I say, I added maybe inline to a bunch of stuff. And that's really all this change was, is just making a bunch of stuff maybe inline and making the padding more consistent. And here in the sugar.c file, you can see maybe inline is just static inline. And the reason you have static on it is because if I just did inline, sometimes it would apparently not be able to inline or whatever. I don't know why that is, but without static, it doesn't give you a definition of the function that isn't inline, apparently. And so you'd get linker errors. I don't know why that's the case, but basically the short story of it is if you do static inline instead of inline, you'll get both versions. And so you don't need to worry about that anymore. So that's what I did for maybe inline. And with that, we're back up to date with, you know, what we've been working on here. So I want to get back to working on the build script. So let me see here. We left off, I believe we looked at all the warnings, and we decided that we want to use warn everything and then add in the ones that we need, basically. So let's get back to doing that. So if I run build.d, okay, so what kind of warnings do we have here? So various warnings relating to initializers. Let's open up the Clang warning thing so that we can search for these. So this one, missing field. Yeah, okay, so missing field initializers. So I want to disable that warning. Let's see, I imagine they spell it with American spelling. Let me double check that. Yeah. Okay, what else? Okay, suggest braces. Okay, that's missing braces. And then another one is the warning about the precedence here. Bitwise dot parentheses. Okay, I think that should be good. Okay, we get warning control reaches end of non-void function. That's expected. Okay, and then this one is because it's trying to handle an assembly file like a C file. So we need to fix the way we're building that next. I feel like what I want to do is I want to make a simpler build script temporarily. And then do these changes and then incorporate it back into the more complicated build script rather than messing around with this file, because this file is kind of messy right now. So let's make something simpler. So I'm going to make a temporary file called buildsimple.d. And let's copy over this. Okay, now what we're going to want to do Let's copy over all of our imports and our helpers for doing running shell commands. Okay, so then let's just write out the command right in here. So I don't care about timing the build, but let's copy some of this stuff over and then change it. Okay, now let me also open up what's that file called? Compile.log. Okay, so this is the command we've been using. And here we see the underlying commands. Now, if we look at the code that's building the command line, so for this build we're setting cc to Clang, then we're setting cc flags to cc flags plus the platform flags. And then additionally, if it's not a release build. We set the bin path to be build path of bin path and debug. We set the cc flags to also include the debug flags, and we set the linker flags to also include the debug flags for that. And I want to start with the debug build of x11. So those are the things we need to do. So first of all, we're going to stick the cc1 in there. And then let's look at the cc flags that we were using. So we want the include path. Let's grab those variables. Okay, now the cc flags also needs the platform. And it needs the x11 flags. Now those yeah, so for now we're just going to use these. And then the debug flags are just the warning flags that we've been working on. So next up, we're going to need to give it the source files. And this is the part that we're going to need to change. But what's next? Next up, we're going to give it the outputs. And so I'm going to need to do this stuff. And then, yeah, I'll need the linker flags after that as well. And I think we hadn't worked on those at all yet. Let me see. Yeah, we hadn't worked on those at all yet, so I think this should be equivalent to what we have currently. I'm directly calling ln here instead of using the linker. I didn't even realize that. But let's give this a try. Oh, it doesn't like the name for modules. Let's just rename it. We could just add a module keyword to resolve that, but I don't care about the name of this thing. There we go. Okay, so now we're back to where we were before. So the problem right now is that we're using cc1, but then we're just passing a C file and an assembly file to it without doing anything special, which is not how you do that. So if we go to the compile log, we see that the way it does it is that it breaks it up into compiling main.c and compiling or assembling the assembly file, and it pre-processes it and then assembles it. but you can see in these here that the way this is done is you specify with -x the type of the source file. Oh, right. Because we renamed it. So in here, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to just say -xc for the C file. And then for the assembly, we say assembler with CPP because it is using the C preprocessor. Okay, how does it like it now? There we go. Okay, so we get tons of warnings, macro is not used. And from what I remember, I don't think we can get it to not give us those built-ins. And we need some of them, I think. Like we use some built-ins, so we obviously need some of them, but we don't care about all of them. But it warns us that all those macros are not used, and so we just want to silence that warning. So how were we doing that before? I believe it was this. Oh, no unused macros, probably that. Let's give that a try. Okay, so that gets rid of the warnings, but we're back to it complaining about expecting an identifier. I thought telling it it's an assembler with CPP file would solve that. Apparently not. Okay, so let me look at the compile log again. Maybe there's more we need to be doing here. Hmm. Um, so I wonder, we might need to do this in 2 passes? I'm thinking we maybe can't compile them both with the same command. We might need to do the assembly stuff separately when we're using cc1. Yeah, I want to try splitting it out. So what I'm going to do is So I want to try something like this. It's still complaining that it expected an identifier or a parenthesis. So what am I missing? Let's look over that compile log again. Probably the -e actually. I bet it's the -e that it's expecting. I think that's what tells it to just run the preprocessor. If we wanted it to compile it, we'd want to run cc1 instead of cc1. So first of all, let's just try to get it to preprocess it. Okay, yeah, so we can get it to preprocess it. Next thing I want to try is, can we get it to do that using cc1 So instead of doing a pass to do preprocessing and a pass to do the actual assembly, I want to tell it to do that in one go. And I think this should work. Let's find out. No. Okay. Oh. Yeah, it probably needs it to be preprocessed. First of all, let's just try getting rid of all that and see what happens. Oh, well, I need to pass it the source file at least, though. So yeah, it's able to build that, but I don't know if it's actually running the preprocessor is the thing, because I maybe don't actually use the preprocessor in my assembly file. In which case, maybe we should just not have a preprocessing pass at all. Let me check if I use the assembler. So no, I'm not. I mean the preprocessor. No, I'm not using the preprocessor in this file. So let's give it a lowercase s to indicate that it's not using the preprocessor. And then update the build file accordingly. Okay, so in that case, you can do it like this. And that gets rid of the complexity of having a preprocessing pass on a file that does not need a preprocessing pass. And then the next thing to do is to see if I can get it to do that in here. So what are the options to -x is the question of the day. Okay, well that tells us, it doesn't tell us what languages are supported. Let's just double check that. Whoops. No, that documentation doesn't help us, so let's go to Google. So where can we find documentation on the list of language options? not very helpful documentation there. So this says there's assembler. Oh, I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. I hope you feel well soon, Krish, and see you later. Thank you for tuning in. So, to the best of my knowledge from what I can tell here, it looks like there's no real documentation on this stuff. That's kind of annoying, but it looks like assembler is what we want. Which makes sense, considering that the preprocessor version is assembler with CPP. But it would be nice if they actually documented this stuff. Anyway. I want to know if we can do something like this. Well, that is complaining invalid use, invalid value assembler. Did I spell it wrong? What if we say with CPP? Because we know there's that. Yeah, so it accepts assembler with CPP, but not assembler, just plain old assembler. Oh, and I hit my 10-minute warning, so I'm gonna have to end it here. So let me just try quickly. Well, no, because if we do it this way, we're using cc1 AS and we don't need to specify that it's assembler. So I don't know if there's a simpler way to do this, but right now it's looking like you just kind of have to do it like this, which is pretty annoying. But that's the situation we're working with here. So I'm gonna need to have this output an object file, and then this output an object file, and then link it in a separate stage. And I'm probably going to want to make a build directory for the temporary files that we build, so I'll do that next time. So I guess I'll end it here. Thanks everyone who tuned in, and I'll see you guys later. Stay risky, everybody.